the story from Yahoo News because I just think that the headline of it is really what it comes down to, and that is who will guard the guardians. That's always been the issue here, is that who is going to be in charge of seeing to it that these individuals are held responsible for what they're doing. And so in this case, the Supreme Court's latest scandals boil down to a question as old as the Romans: who will guard the guardians? Well, Supreme Court justices are under renewed scrutiny due to recently uncovered financial dealings. Revelations regarding Justices Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, and John Roberts highlight the lack of ethics enforcement. SCOTUS is the only court in the U.S. where the justices police themselves, expert told Insider. So again, who will police the police?
Doesn't that seem counter to the whole checks and balances thing, the whole concept of checks and balances? See, there is a way that there has to be a balance for that. So it's obviously would be the legislative check on it some way, somehow. So what is that? That's the impeachment process, right? Like that's the process by which you would have the check on that body, because look, we all took civics, right? There's the chart with the three houses and there's arrows going in every direction. And so they are technically not supposed to be policing themselves. That's my point. I understand they are, but they shouldn't.
Well, it's almost like the legislative policing the judicial policing the executive, and the executive policing the legislative. Something along those lines.
Well, no, it goes all different directions. That's the whole point of it's a nice little three-way triangle of directions. My point is they should
to police each other.
Yeah, that's the whole premise of the way the Constitution is written, is the checks and balances. We were taught this at a young age. So when you say that they're policing themselves, or that just is out of habit and out of just policy and probably just sort of history, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Let's not be fooled. That's silly.
Last week, reports emerged that Justice Neil Gorsuch sold property to the head of a major law firm shortly after his confirmation, without identifying the buyer on his federal disclosure forms. And on Friday, insiders Matthias Schwartz reported about a whistleblower alleging that Chief Justice John Roberts' wife paid $10 million by elite law firms, including one who argued a case in front of Roberts at the court. I mean, talk about a conflict of interest, right, Lou? Am I right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Roberts last week also declined to have justices sit for an ethics hearing requested by members of the Senate Judiciary Committee after initial revelations into Thomas and Crow's long-standing relationship. The Supreme Court did not return insiders' request for comment. Not a surprise. As questions have stacked about how the justices who can play by their own rules and whose dealings can be shrouded in secrecy could be policed on these issues, answers have become harder to pluck. And the more the system gets exposed for how corrupt it really is, the more you understand why people don't want to vote, don't want to be involved, and people are getting restless to the point at which they're showing up at events, getting rabble-roused, and then you also see people showing up at places and shooting people. And if you wonder why that's happening,
breaking into people's houses.
Correct. Am I right?
Careful, she's got like a fur ball. Go ahead. She's fine.
So,
what else did we want to talk about?
Steve Vladeck, a professor at the University of Texas School of Law and author of the forthcoming book, The Shadow Docket, How the Supreme Court Uses Stealth Rulings to Amass Power and Undermine the Republic, briefed on Insider that ethics enforcement should be a nonpartisan issue. Of course. It's in the interest of the court, but of course the Supreme Court was designed not to be partisan, just like the presidency was designed not to be partisan. But that, of course, changed. And it changed in a very bad way. You know, the amazing thing about, how great George Washington really was as our first president is that it wasn't like there was this grace period of Washington setting precedent for the nation as the true independent president that he was. It changed immediately between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They didn't even wait. They immediately went into this BS. And that's why history should not rank them high, even though there were good things that they did, because they set this shit in motion. Alexander Hamilton was responsible for the forming of the Democratic Party, and Thomas Jefferson is responsible for the forming of the Republican Party, as it stands today. We had it happen immediately. Which is why when there aren't guardians at the gate, when there aren't people that are looking out for the best interests of the people, then what the hell is the point of the republic? You had to literally go through a civil effing war before you got to a president who was anywhere near of the valor of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. You had to go through the Industrial Revolution and the complete pillaging of working communities and children before you got to an accidental president of the same valor in Teddy Roosevelt. You had to go through the worst depression this country's ever seen before you got to FDR.
And you know why, right? You know why all of that.
Because you literally have to get to the bottom before you eventually.
But do you understand what the continuing thread that keeps pushing us to the bottom?
Corporate special interest. Right?
Well, yes, and some would argue capitalism is the continuous thread that when unfettered and unregulated gets completely out of control. And then eventually there's a rebellion or a revolution or something that pulls it back in line. But ultimately, that's what keeps happening. And we're seeing it now. The income, the wealth inequality right now is at a bigger disparity than ever. And we have a society with more guns than people. What could go wrong? Seriously.
The Supreme Court is the only court not bound by a specific code of ethics, but all federal judges, including the top justices, are expected to follow ethics statutes and are required to file financial disclosure forms. There is a reason why things have sunk as far as they have. So when something like these scandals show up, it shouldn't surprise anybody. Like it really shouldn't. It's just further proof that the system is broken. It is being exposed every day. And
it's so sad to me. Like the whole, I really did for a long time have like put the Supreme Court on somewhat of a pedestal.
And at one time it belonged there.
It just makes me really, it's, I don't know. I guess I always thought of the executive branch as being, that's just a bozo popularity contest.
But you know what the irony is? The irony is that this all started with the very justice that basically was the inflection point of this whole mess, and that's Clarence Thomas. That's where it started.
That was the first time when I remember watching the appointment process, the hearing process, and I felt like, this is somebody who has no business being on the court. Like this was the first time I ever really felt that way, that this person has no business being there and just is so not in that, is just so not the right person. And it went downhill. It really is. I mean, there have been a few people that I'm trying to think the last right or Republican appointed person. Roberts is, there are some that are, at least we'd say they're qualified for the job.
Yeah.
They've had people
Gorsuch is qualified.
Yeah. That's not what I'm talking. But Clarence Thomas was the first time for me, someone really where it was like a big bubble burst in terms of what the level of qualifications were in terms of temperament, in terms of professionalism, in terms of, decorum. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.